As I said, I'm very excited for this. Some of my favorite women's sports are women's tennis, and I love ice skating, so I'm very much into women's sports in general. Right? So the first question I want to ask, and I guess I will start with Priscilla, and then we'll work our way down.
Thank you.
When did you first become interested in sports, and what or who influenced you to play?
I'd say there was nothing that really influenced me to play except for the motivation of being outside and getting out of the house. I started playing softball at a very young age. I was probably about 10 years old when I started playing softball, and it pretty much neighborhood kids getting together and going out and doing something, and then started playing on a travel team. And then when I got to junior high, softball was my main sport. And in the off season, I was like, I need something to do. I'll go out for the volleyball team. Went out for the volleyball team, and at the time, Coach Leonard, who was the old volleyball coach here, was the coach at the high school that I went to.
Oh, okay.
So she coached varsity, and I made the JV team. She told me later that she was really not even going to put me on the team because I wasn't that good, but I was kind of athletic. So that's how I got into it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Jane?
Since I'm the elder of them all, I was pre-television and pre-everything else that's technology at all. But I was an outdoors person, and I grew up in a small middle-class neighborhood in Thomasville that was made up mostly of boys. And we did all sorts of things. We played tag, we played hide and seek, we played any over. If you don't know that game, it's over the houses, and all of our houses were built just like this. It was a great game. But the two things that we wanted was a basketball and a basketball goal. And my dad was aware of that. So he bought me from Sears a basketball. And of course it was a rubber basketball, but we were just so glad to have a basketball. And then he said, but we must have some sort of basketball goal. And a la James Naismith, my daddy literally took the old peach basket and he cut off the bottom part of the peach basket. And it was a metal rim at that time, by the way. It was not a wooden rim. It was a metal rim. And he attached it to the garage. Well, really not a garage. It was a car shed. And the car was in there sometime, or coal or wood were in there, whichever we needed. It sat on the end of the front of the roof, and the roof was slanted. So we knew that we had to absolutely hit the peach basket top, or you had to go chase the ball over the back of the car shed down to the building. But it became the gathering place in my neighborhood. And it was one of those things that probably attracted us more to basketball than all these other things. When I got to the 7th and the 8th grade, and I'm not sure why, but they decided to have a 7th and an 8th grade basketball team, and we played the other 3 elementary schools in Thomasville on the other side of the tracks from where we were. We, of course, at that time played 6-person teams. If you're not aware of that, ask anybody with gray hair. They will explain that to you. 3 guards, 3 forwards, and never did we ever cross the center line. We played half court when I was in the 7th and the 8th grade, and I was an early mature, and I was taller than everybody, so all they had to do was get me the ball, and I shot. There was no 3-second rule. There wasn't even, I'm not even sure there was a lane at that time in the gym we played in. And we beat all the other 3 elementary schools. So when it came time for high school, I knew I was going out for the team. Well, by that time, lots of other people had matured more than me and caught up with me. Some were taller than me, and some were far better than I was. But I made the team and played 4 years as the guard, which meant I never got to shoot. And if I got fouled, somebody else on the other end took my free throw for me. I never got to do that. We had an outstanding women's basketball team in high school. We had a young lady who had perfected a jump shot before people did the jump shot. One of the highlights of that high school career was when Thomasville beat Statesville 103-89, and Sybil got 68 points with her jump shot. So that's my experience with athletics. And of course, when I went to Wake Forest, there was nothing but intramurals, so high school ended my athletic activity. Except I participate in senior games now, that's, sorry.
Hey?
I don't remember ever not being interested in playing sports. My dad, my parents were very young when they got married. They were still in college, and my dad played basketball. And then he became a middle school teacher for a few years and was the basketball coach for the 7th grade boys. And I just spent a lot of time in the gym, and I really don't remember not being interested. I also grew up in Indiana, and if you grow up in Indiana, you play basketball when you're either in middle school or high school. So that's really how it started, and then I sort of found volleyball somewhere in there, and I think in middle school, which was the sport that ended up really being the sport that I loved the most. And I went to a Division III school where I played volleyball.
Well, my experience probably was most influenced by my father, and he probably would have been able to play professional baseball if he hadn't got drafted. But if he hadn't got drafted, I probably wouldn't be here. So I'm kind of glad that, because when he got out of the Army, he was, things changed and your pathways changed. But no question, I can tell you a true story. When I was 2 years old, the only reason I know this is because I have a scar on my head to remember it, but when I was 2 years old, he had me down at the ball field, and he used to be the executive director of the YMCA and also then later the recreation director. And but when he was working at the Y, he used to take care of the ball fields. He would, clean them up and drag them and line them and do all that stuff. And I guess he had me down there one day, and he just left me on the bleachers at 2. Why he thought I was going to stay there, I have no idea. But I fell off and cut my head open, and my mother got very angry at him. But I still went with him everywhere and throughout my childhood. But later on in life, I was playing adult women's softball at age 10. Wow. So he was a good athlete, and I think I inherited some of his genes, so I was fortunate enough to be doing that. But when I was in high school, he coached our softball team for the summer, and he was the coach. I played second base. My sister played first base, and my mother played wherever we needed her because she was a good athlete too. So that's my experience.
I started playing with soccer, and I was a gymnast for a little while, and then kind of since lacrosse is a huge deal in Maryland, most everyone plays at some point in their life. My grandfather introduced me to the game. He wished that he played it, but a bunch of his friends played. So I would go over to his house, and there was a brick wall. I would just kind of throw the ball around there and see what happened. And everyone in Maryland at some point, I didn't start actually lacrosse until like 3rd or 4th grade, but sports were always a big deal in my life. And again, being outside was so much fun for me. So my sister and I, whatever sport I played, she would play. So I always had someone to do it with.
Well, my parents kind of just put me into sports because I was just an energetic little kid, and I don't think they really knew what else to do with me. And I fell in love with competition, and I played soccer and basketball until my mom made me try out for volleyball, thinking I could maybe be good at it. And I did, and I fell in love with that too. And now I'm here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Janie, I'd like to ask you a question. You were a trailblazer in organizing women's athletic program here at Elon University. Can you give us a little bit of the history of the early days and how you helped build the program, and what were some of the challenges you might have faced?
Yeah, I will. I wanted you to notice that when I was going through the drawers today looking for some note paper, I found some that say Elon College, 1889 to 1989. It was our centennial year, and this was the stationery that we printed. So, by the way, really dates me, doesn't it? I really appreciate Rod mentioning the title Director of Physical Culture, because you will find that title all the way up through early 1900s. It was still that, but I want to read you what they meant about physical culture. And this was only for women because they called it physical training for men students, but for women, this is what the catalog in 1898-99, this is how it describes it. The end sought in this program is reposeful and dignified bearing, grace and ease of manner, and the overcoming of all appearance of self-consciousness. So now you know what physical culture was at that particular time. And then you will see the title Director of Athletics. And that's kind of a misnomer because, as he said, it really wasn't athletics per se, in that most of their activities were on campus. Almost a forerunner of what we called intramurals, but they just didn't call it that at all. In the 1920 Phi Psi Chi, I found track introduced and the picture of one of the men students running track. I found the girls' tennis squad, and if you'll notice, they played in all the long skirts and the button-top shoes, and how on earth they did that, we don't know. There was a description of basketball, 1920, and I thought, oh, I can find out something about the women's team. No, that's a description of all of the men's basketball team and a description of every player that was on that team. Nothing anywhere in these early records mentions the women, but there was a picture of the girls' basketball teams, which leads us to believe that they probably divided these girls up into teams and they played each other. So the term athletics was kind of really not athletics as we perceive athletics. You know, one of the problems was that there were no places for women to play. When West Dorm was built, behind West Dorm, they added a dormitory and a gymnasium, and it finally was designated the women's gym. But both buildings burned about 16 years after they were built, and never were those returned. So women didn't have a place for any activity except outside for a long time, because when they built North Dorm, which stood where Powell Building is, there was a gymnasium there, but it was definitely called the men's gymnasium. And the description, if you ever have an opportunity, it was considered one of the first-class gyms in this part of America at that particular time. Pretty soon, the title became Director of Physical Education for Women, and I think it's very interesting where they stopped saying girls and where they started saying women, and I'm not sure when that occurred, and I don't know if that meant a change in attitude from calling them girls and calling them women, but you'll definitely see that that takes place there. In 1955, what had been the Girls Athletic Association became the Women's Recreation Association. And that was the intramural activity. And I wanted to mention, because this you can see some progress being made in what occurred. When I was a student at Wake Forest, I came to Elon one time to a play day. And we gathered up a large group of girls and we came to Elon to play. And when we walked in alumni gym, which was the only gym at that particular time, there were jars with colors in them and you chose a number. So then you went to participate in basketball and tennis and volleyball and softball and sometime dance. But I was from Wake Forest. The girl next to me may have been from Salem, the girl on the other side from Catawba, and the idea was that we needed to mix and mingle. I call that the cookie and tea time for women's athletics. They didn't want it to be so competitive. It was just be nice to each other and enjoy your day, but you won't go back to Wake Forest thinking, we were really good, we beat them all, because we didn't, because nobody on my team may have been from Wake Forest. It could have been somebody else. We made the move from play days to sport days. And then we did bring a team from Wake Forest or from Elon or from Catawba or Salem, Chapel Hill, all those other places. We would go to a place and we could decide who was on our team from Wake Forest, or you could decide who was on your team from Chapel Hill. And we participated as our institutional teams and we played those same sports. So we did leave that day thinking, we were really good in basketball, we'll get better in tennis next year. So it was a sport day as opposed to a play day. We still had lunch and we still had tea and cookies, but it was in advance anyway at that particular time. Soon the next one was a sport day, but it was a particular sport day. So Chapel Hill may decide we are going to have a volleyball sport day. You may bring your best volleyball teams and play in our sport day tournament. Or Catawba may decide they're going to have basketball, same thing, bring your best basketball tournament. So after I came in '67, and of course everything was in alumni gym, Jordan Gym opened in '71, and we knew there was a sport volleyball day at Appalachian. And our intramural teams were very, very good at that particular time. And I got together an intramural team. We practiced with the men students. We were really, really good, and we were going up there to Appalachian and bring home the trophy on that particular day. We didn't win a game. We didn't know the proper way to set, volleyball people can appreciate this, because the rules had changed, and frankly, I had not kept up with them. We did intramurals, we did class, we did skills. I came home that day and met with the girls immediately after we got back here, and I said, I'm not a coach, I have no desire to be a coach, but you need a coach. And word began to spread, and I got that word to Dr. Danley. And Dr. Danley said, yes, I believe they really do need a coach. You see, most of these girls had played some athletic teams in high school, and they were good enough to have a team of their own, and they really wanted that. So Dr. Danley, of course, hired Kay Yao, as he mentioned. I interviewed Dr. Danley several years ago, and it's on file in the archives room. And I said, talk to me about hiring Kay Yao, and he said, I interviewed her and I hired her. That's the way we did in those days. And he did. And of course, Kay came in, having grown up in Gibsonville, having been a great high school basketball player at Gibsonville High School, and then graduated at East Carolina with no opportunity to play, and then she was coaching at Ragsdale High School. So people in this area knew Kay very, very well. So she came here to start our teams. If you were to look at the record, you will find in the recorded history that the first women's basketball team was 1971-72. Kay and I and 7 girls know better than that. The first basketball team was 1970-71. No records were kept. I do have, by the way, a handwritten schedule that one of the girls happened to keep. Our first game was at Wake Forest. And so when Kay counts up her years of coaching, she always says, now we agree, we started in 1970, and I say, yes, we do. Well, you know, there were some people, even some physical educators, as I was a physical educator, who didn't think that women's athletics was good. They didn't think it was good for us. I gathered some research, and I won't read all these to you, but I think you need to hear some of the reasons that many people said women's athletics would never work, it wasn't good for us. First of all, physically, the female is not suited for overstrenuous activity. Endurance is shorter. The menstrual cycle presents a handicap for strenuous activity. The shoulder girdle is not suited for excessive shoulder activity, and the strength is not as great as the male. Emphasis is put on sex and attire rather than playing ability. Emotional stability may be upset under pressure of highly competitive sports. So we were really bucking the system when we decided we wanted women's athletics. Some of us knew that there were lots of good things that could occur from women's athletics, and we let that be known. It was a hard sell sometime, but we definitely let that be known. In 1971 and 72, there are records of the basketball program. Not very good records, not very complete records. We've gone through those, several of us. Faith is one of those persons. But at least there's a record that that game started. When volleyball was added, the same thing. It isn't, I think, that they didn't consider it not important. It was just that, oh, that's the program over there. This is the men's program over here, and that's another program. I'm not even sure that it was consciously done that we don't have to worry about keeping records. I interviewed Coach Yao and Dr. D and Jackie and some of the early players, and they'll tell you about those first games. No uniforms. One of the girls happened to have a sewing machine. They cut out the letters, they sewed them on T-shirts, and those were their first uniforms. They drove their own cars. They ate packaged sandwiches for lunch for whatever their travel meal was. That's what they did. Finally, the men's track coach loaned them the men's track warm-up suits, and they were so very, very glad to get those. There weren't a lot of complaints in those early days. These young women were just happy to have the opportunity to play, folks. They wanted to play so badly. But then some things did begin to happen. We were governed by AIAW, Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. That was the first organization, and it was started by folks like me and lots of others in the colleges who wanted this. We didn't have any scholarships. We thought that athletics was for the purpose of what it could do for the player, not for the institution. When Kay left here and took players like Jackie with her to state, The men in this campus were up in arms. What do you mean you let them go? And we said, AIW says that it's okay if they want to choose to go to another institution, we let them transfer. AIW had a voting representative on each campus, and in most cases, that was a woman. When the NCAA and the NAIA, of which we were members at that particular time, decided they wanted to take over women's athletics, we were pretty successful, folks. I think they saw that. Maybe we should have a hand in this. AIW died away. I've got lots of publications with titles like An Odd Way to Even Things Up. That's what they were trying to do. The feds find unequal sports but let the colleges off. Women lose jobs to men. And when NAIA and NCAA took over women's athletics, except for the University of Texas, every woman administrator lost her job. Wow. There were only men administrators. Wow. I want to give you one example before I stop that perhaps there was some feeling of maybe things aren't fair. And Kay talks about this in her interview that's over in the archives room. In 1975, our women's team was very successful, but we were runner-up in the district, so therefore we did not qualify to go up to the next level. But we received an at-large bid to go. So we appealed to our athletic administration to let us go to that game, and they refused to let us go. That same spring, there was the men's golf team who was in the very same situation, identical situation, and they let the men's golf team go. Now, whether or not Kay would have gone on to state anyway, perhaps she would have, but right after that occurred, Kay received the call to state, and of course she left, and so the story goes on and on. But we hired other coaches who have done very, very well. But I wanted you to see that even though we weren't ugly in our push for women's athletics, we were very firm that we wanted them. And I think that's probably why we were successful in getting it started. And then the rest of the story, these other people can talk about. But that's the beginning.
Thank you. Jack? Jackie, you were the head of women's basketball and tennis coach at Elon from 1985 to 1994. What were some of the changes you saw during your tenure here, and what were some of the most memorable moments you can recall? I should add before you go ahead that you were also, as was pointed out, a student here from 1974 through 78, right when Title IX was being implemented. So you might have a story about that as well.
Well, I was on that team that Janie was just telling you about, and I sat in the president's office and had to hear them say that we are not going to allow you to go. And it was just like, somebody putting a knife through your chest. And one of the changes that I realized that has happened is that Elon and the institution that I currently work at, Meredith College, we're very happy and welcome opportunities to market our sports, whether it be men or women. And we would never think about not sending them because it's just great publicity for the school. And so I'll never forget that. It was a very tough day, but my whole experience as a student athlete at Elon was memorable. I work at a Division III institution, and sometimes because of our academic focus, some of our juniors and seniors do not participate in their third and fourth year. And I would play today if physically I could, and if the NCAA would allow me. So it was a great opportunity. But I will say that two things happened when I was here during my tenure that were very instrumental, I think, in taking the athletics program where they are today, and that is 2 new facilities were built. The Jimmy Powell Tennis Center was constructed. I was part of that because I coach women's tennis and basketball, and it's an incredible facility. It's still an incredible facility, and it was a great recruiting tool for me as a young tennis coach. And if you took an athlete down there, that's pretty impressive. It didn't take much. But we had what was called the Tom Sawyer Huck Finn Tennis Tournament, and Jane's husband plays in that tournament, and it was just a wonderful thing. It was a great event. It was around the July 4th weekend. And we used to raise probably around $25,000 just in that event alone, because we had like men's doubles, women's mixed doubles. It was just great. It was just a fun time, and it raised money to help build that facility. And then also while I was here, we renovated Alumni Gym. And one of my most memorable times was to be able to coach the first game in that new facility. So I can't say that it was memorable to go down to the middle school and practice while we didn't have this, this court, because that was very frustrating. You have to get in a van every single day and drive the team down to a Cracker Box gym. And we also played at Williams High School a couple of times, which was nice because that's a nice facility. But I think that those two things, in terms of the facilities that the women get to participate in. And when they were building and renovating Alumni Gym, it was nice to also witness that the locker rooms were going to be built the same way. The coaches' offices were the same size and all those kinds of things, because it wasn't always that way. So I think that was two things that happened during my tenure that I find that were very valuable in, setting the tone going forward to where you are today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Priscilla, I want to ask you the next question. You graduated from Elon in 1995 and...
Out loud.
2005, I'm sorry, there's a typo. And you broke all kinds of records on the women's volleyball team, from what I understand. You now coach volleyball at the Jammers Volleyball Club and are involved in coach recruitment and prepping girls for college play. What are some of your philosophies as a coach, and what advice do you give girls and young women to excel at the college level in a sport?
Coaching philosophies they change as the players change. I've seen a shift in the types of players that we deal with and work with every year. The type of level of commitment from the player themselves, the push from their parents, and things of that nature. So I always tell the team when I first start, I always have a parents meeting, and I say, parents are the worst. And they look at me really strange, and I say, normally the players don't have issues. It's normally the parents who have issues. So if you let me do my job, and I'll let you do your job, then we'll have a great relationship. And they kind of look at me strange, but by the end of the season, they get it.
Right.
And understand that, in order for me to coach somebody's child, they have to give me the ability to do the coaching and respect the philosophies that I do have in saying that not only do I want to make you a better volleyball player, I want to teach you life skills that you're going to walk away with that's going to teach you how to manage your time better, how to be a better person, how to think about others before considering yourself. Those are the types of things that I like to teach my girls when I am coaching. Okay. And the other part of the question was?
And so the other part that I asked you was basically, what advice would you give to girls and young women coming up who are going to play college sports or want to play college sports?
And I tell the girls all the time that you have to work hard and you have to put yourself out there. Unlike men's sports, a lot of times women's sports are not as recognized as men's sports when it comes to recruiting process. And so you got a pool of a whole lot of people bidding on a couple of positions. So they have to put themselves out there to the coaches in a articulate way. So you can't send just mass letters to people with no introduction, no, personable attributes to the letter. You got to be personable. You got to know exactly what you're talking about. You got to do your research.
Sell yourself in a sense.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Same thing from the business world. I try to bring a lot of what I do on a regular basis into that process that they learn early on how to deal with individuals on that level.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Faith, you get the next question. You've been the senior woman administrator at Elon Athletics since 2002. And with that in mind, can you give us an overview of the past decade of women's sports at Elon University? And, so for example, just one question, what were your goals when you came here and what progress did you make or roadblocks did you run into?
Sure. I'll just start out by talking about the part that I like the best is the success that we've experienced over the last 10 years. We won our first Southern Conference tournament championship in softball in 2010. Volleyball was division champions in the Southern Conference in 2010 as well. Over the last 11 years, we've had 19 individual SoCon track champions, and I know at least one of those was a record holder in the conference. We had a pole vaulter who was very, very good. We finished twice in the top 3 in SoCon track championships, which if you know the league, that's a really big deal. We are competing against schools like Appalachian, Western, Georgia Southern that have a much lower cost of attendance. And track isn't a sport generally where students get lots of full scholarships. So if we give a student a half scholarship here at Elon, they still have $20,000 left to pay. If App gives a student a half scholarship, they have maybe $6,000 left to pay. So to be able to compete with those schools is a huge, huge thing for us. One of those SoCon champions is actually training to become, to be on the national skeleton team. She wasn't on the team this year, but she was the push champion in 2012. And when I was watching the Olympics, I remember hearing that one of the women who was competing had been the push champion a year or 2 before. So hopefully Veronica will be able to continue her success. We've had a ton of SoCon Players of the Year and Coaches of the Year in our women's sports. And then this past year is our inaugural year of women's lacrosse, which has been very, very exciting. So that's just kind of a real brief look at the success. In terms of goals, when I got here in 2002, as an institution, we were going through the NCAA certification process. So the institution had some goals that they were already moving on when I got here. But my main focus was really to try and organize and develop some strategies and formalize how we were going to do our gender equity planning so that we could reach those goals. We, at first, were really looking at kind of basic things that we needed to close the gap on, like differences in recruiting budgets and travel budgets and that kind of thing. And we were able to do that in the first part of our gender equity planning process. And then we started to tackle the bigger issues. And the first really big goal that we tackled was to get all of our women's sports fully funded in terms of scholarships. The NCAA has a limit in each sport that we're allowed to offer as for scholarship money. And we were only at the limit in women's basketball. So we worked hard and we were able to do that. And as of, I guess it was last year, we are fully funded, and all of our women's sports, well now, except for lacrosse, because we phase those scholarships in over time. You can't invest all of that scholarship money in the first class because you won't have anything left for the next class and the class after that. So that's the reason that they're not fully funded. So that was a huge accomplishment for us. We also had some facility issues that needed to be addressed, locker rooms, competition facilities. The old softball field is a parking lot now, but for those of you who don't know where the softball field was, I called it the sand lot. It was behind East Gym, where that big parking lot is now. And that was a glaring difference when you look at the baseball stadium. There's certainly not an equitable facility. And also, we were able to build a building for them that has been fantastic. It's beautiful, and it houses their locker rooms. And really now, I would say that we've got one of the best facilities. It's not the biggest facility, but one of the best facilities easily in the Southern Conference. And I think that that'll hold up as we move into the Colonial. Again, locker rooms, we've made wholesale changes throughout that. We expanded and improved our women's basketball locker rooms. We didn't have, some of our sports didn't have locker rooms when I first got here. Wow. And now everybody has a locker room, which has been a really big thing for our teams to have that kind of home. And then the last thing, and this was also really important, and this is kind of what led up to women's lacrosse, was to sort of develop a strategy to deal with our sports sponsorship inequity in terms of Title IX. For those of you who don't know, our student population is about 60% female and 40% male, and that's held pretty steady for a long time, and that's really a national, that's pretty common. And as much as admissions has tried to move the dial in terms of attracting more men to the university, it's just a really hard thing to do because everybody in the country, for the most part, is trying to do that as well. But when I got here in 2002, our male participants made up 69% of our student athletes. So you can see that it's a flip-flop. We've got 40% male students on campus, but 60% male student athletes in the athletic department. We've made up, we're still not where we need to be. This is not including women's lacrosse, because we actually haven't done the data for this past year yet, because it's not, well, this year isn't over. But we are at 51% male and 49% female, so we've made up 8% in the last decade. So we're moving in the right direction, and like I said, that doesn't include women's lacrosse, but it's, something that we're chugging along, and we'll kind of see where things go after we get that program established. So those are really kind of the big goals, and I can say really honestly and with pride that the university has been incredibly supportive in making sure that we are achieving those goals. From Dr. Lambert right on down, they've been willing to plan, they've been willing to figure out, I mean, it's lots of money that's been invested to be able to increase scholarships, to build facilities, and this university, fortunately, particularly in comparison to other places that I work and places that I know some of my colleagues, it's been so much easier to get those things done here because people are really interested in moving that forward. So, so there's that. Did you want me to talk about the committee?
Sure, please. I'd love to hear about it. So I'll just
Okay, I'm
ask.
sorry.
I'll just let them know the question I was going to ask her as a follow-up. So I was going to say, you're also involved in the committees in the Southern Conference and NCAA. What are some of the issues that these committees have addressed and continue to address in terms of gender and diversity?
I served on the NCAA's Committee on Women's Athletics for 4 years, and in the final year, I was the chair, which was a really odd experience for me because my beginning in college athletics was in an internship program at the NCAA that was sponsored by the Committee on Women's Athletics. So it was just sort of a weird, it was just sort of weird how things kind of went 360 for me in that experience. And oddly enough, my athletic director from when I was in college came onto the committee in my final year, and she was the one that actually handed me the application for the NCAA internship and said, here, you should consider this. So full circle plus for me in that experience. The Committee on Women's Athletics deals with a lot of different issues. One of the things that we spent a lot of time on was emerging sports. Over the years, the committee has helped designate certain sports that seem to have traction out in the collegiate world as emerging sports and has been able to grow those and move those through to become NCAA championships. Women's hockey is a great example of that. That's a championship that is now thriving, and that came up through the emerging sport process. We approved sand volleyball as an emerging sport while I was on the committee, which was fantastic for me, being a volleyball person, but also it's just something that I think has legs and has really grown during that time and will continue to grow. We also do some work and we look at opportunities for women to participate in sport, both as coaches and athletes. One of the things that we were able to do when we were on the committee is they did a work-life study, a work-life balance study. And I mean, as we expected, there was no balance. But it was really interesting when they did this study and they looked at, the reasons that women had left coaching or left administration. And they were very different than the reasons that men had left. For men, it was, I just didn't make enough money to support my family. I just didn't want to do it anymore. A lot of it, though, was around compensation and that kind of thing. For women, it was, I want to be there when my kids have their basketball games. Women are usually the primary caretaker, and it wasn't about compensation. It wasn't people saying, hey, we don't make enough money, this isn't worth it. it was really those types of issues that came up, which was not surprising, but was very interesting to have that really kind of quantified like that. We worked on some LGBTQ issues, particularly around transgender student athletes, and we're able to help move a little bit forward, I think, with developing some ideas and some policy around bringing transgender student athletes into an athletic program. There's also a national organization, and I forget the acronym now, who was very helpful in that. And there's actually a book now that goes through policy that they produced, but consulted with us on a little bit, that talks and really helps programs, if they have a transgender student athlete, work through that process of bringing them into the program. And then also we reviewed national trends in sports sponsorship, women in coaching, academic issues. That was an interesting one. Generally speaking, women's athletics perform very well academically, but one of the trends that we started to see is women's basketball is getting better and better. Even though their academic profile is still good, it's dropping. Which was a little bit scary. So that was something that the committee had started to look at as I was leaving. So it was an amazing experience to be a part of that. I was also on the Olympic Sport Liaison Committee, and the best part about that was that I got to meet Apollo Ono at the at the Olympic Training Center. So, he has beautiful eyes. He's a very nice man. So
Thank you very much. I'd like to move to our current athletes right now, and it's funny because Faith was mentioning lacrosse is one of the basically the newest sport, and it's something I mentioned in my introduction, one of the newest sports here at Elon University. So, Sloane, I'd like to go to you first. As I mentioned, it's the newest varsity sport added to Elon's roster. What do you think this opportunity has meant to Elon's women's sports program and to you personally?
I think to Elon's women's sports program, it means that we are now as a school going to draw a lot more people, because Elon is such an amazing school academically and athletically now, that lacrosse is such a big growing sport that now it's going to really attract people to Elon. And Elon was already an amazing school, but now with this addition, it's huge for us. And we've seen so much support around campus for us, and for our first game at home, we had so many people there, and to me personally, it means seeing people around that, are asking questions. They want to know more about the rules. People aren't really sure about those yet, but they're coming along, and it's really been so amazing to see how much people are really interested in it, and even if they don't know everything yet, they're still doing their best to find out, and it's growing in North Carolina as a sport, so people really want to learn more, and it's so much fun going through this.
So I take it it's more dominant in the Northeast as a sport than in the Southeast, would you say?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Fantastic. And Anna, I want to ask you a question as well, of course. You've received all-state honors in volleyball here at Elon. And so what are some of the benefits you see for women in general and for you personally to be involved in a women's college sports program, and what has it meant to your career?
To be involved in a women's college sports program, especially at Elon, is, I don't know, it's incredible. There's so much you learn just from playing sports or being an athlete, like time management, how to be healthy, how to take care of yourself, how to interact with people, how to lead. There's so much. But for women in general, other than those things, I think it's awesome because there's so many great girls out there, and they need to be exposed as the strong, great people they are. I think that's really cool that athletics can do that.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to ask two more questions for the panel, just because if you look at that clock, it says 5, but it's completely wrong. So we're at about 5:50. It hasn't moved since we've got here, just to let you know. So I have two questions. I want relatively brief answers to these two questions, and I'll just start it off with whoever wants to pick up this first question. What is your favorite or most memorable story from participating in athletics or running an athletics program for women. So you could say, you know, I will always remember the time when blank, for example. And I'll just start it with Jackie, for example. So,
Okay. Well, kind of going back to being a student athlete here and then a coach here, one of my most memorable moments in the history of being a student athlete was when we won the state championship in softball. And as Janie has already mentioned, that was when we were under the umbrella of the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And all the schools in the area were all under the same umbrella. So we competed against UNC and NC State and, you know, what are now Division I institutions. And so to win a state championship against the larger schools like that made us very proud. So that was something that was very special. As a coach, I coached 2 sports, tennis and basketball, and I have to say that, and you can probably hear from Priscilla's comments, that the most important thing about coaching is your relationship with your players. There's nothing that can equate to that. I mean, it's just an amazing experience to be able to relate to young people and to try to teach them life skills and skills of the sport that they are participating in. But as a coach, I had a couple of really awesome experiences. My tennis team qualified for the national tournament twice, once when we were in the NAI, and I went to Kansas City with that team. And the other time was when I had a doubles team that was good, and they won the whole conference championship, district championship, and actually Janie went with me when we went out to the City of Industry near Los Angeles, and that was a great experience. And then in basketball, we one of my most memorable times was we had a win over the #1 team that was ranked at that time, #1 team in the nation, Wingate College. And they were a member of our conference, but they were ranked #1. They had an incredible program for years during the time that I was here. And so to be able to get that win over them at the time they were #1 was huge. Wow. And going back to experiences with my players, I used to give my seniors a funny gift when they graduated from college. And one of the members of that team that played for me when we were able to beat Wingate, her name was Barbara Johnson, and her nickname was Duck. And she had the most incredible personality and a great sense of humor. And so when she graduated, I gave her a duck.
a live duck, not like
A live duck. It was in the cage. And I can still see her face. So that was neat.
Wonderful. Priscilla? Okay.
My most memorable moment was my sophomore year. We made it to nationals and went to San Diego. And at the time, the way they set it up, they had to send us out there like we were going to win. And we got out there, and the first game on the schedule was Brigham Young University of Hawaii. Now, these girls were huge. We were already they won the national title the year before. So they were our first game. And that's before rally point scoring. So that was a long time ago. And so you had to earn every point that you received, and it was games to 15, not to 25. Do you know, and you had 2 out of 3 games. We scored 1 point out of the 2 games, and it was because they footballed it. So we lost pretty early, but we had 7 fun-filled days in San Diego. We tried to get on every television show there was. We went to Tijuana. I mean, I probably shouldn't have said that. But we had a blast, but that was a very memorable moment. And during that time, Dr. White and his wife came out and took us to dinner at Hotel Del Coronado, which is beautiful during Christmas time. It was amazing, and we were on cloud 9 whether we were losing or not. But we just knew what our fate was going to be that first day when we looked at those girls, and their shoulders were the span of about 3 of us put together, and they were hitting the ball so hard that I was ducking from the ball. So that was a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next, Sloane.
I would say the most memorable moment was probably last month when we played Duke for the first time. It was we didn't win, but it was so cool to see everything coming together. We had played in the fall. We had 2 tournaments, but we had been playing ourselves for months, and to be able to play someone else for our first game, like actually being out there all together was so amazing. And then we were able to take that experience, and moving forward, we're doing really well right now.
Fantastic. Janie?
I scored 12 points, and we won 16-6 in the 8th grade, and those are the last 2 points I ever scored.
Funny. Anna?
Probably bus rides with these 3 girls right here, my teammates. Those are so fun. We always play charades and weird games. And
Oh, wow.
I love those.
The team camaraderie. And last but not least, Faith?
It's hard to pick one because I've been here for 12 years. Probably my favorite was when we won the Southern Conference softball championship. It was the first Southern Conference championship we had ever won, so we hadn't picked out championship rings yet. So to sit there with our softball coach and with our athletic director and go through all of the sample rings and pick out that first women's championship ring was a great day.
Wow.
But I'll also say just one other good day, funny day, I guess. We were taking some of our teams on foreign trips, foreign competition tours, and we were on the Champs-Élysées, and we were standing waiting to cross the street, and one of the players started to walk out in the street like the cars were going to stop like they do here. And one of her teammates grabbed her by the back of her collar and pulled her back and said, "This isn't Elon." That was a memorable moment, too.
That's funny. Our last question for today is basically, where do we go from here? If you could see one change or progression in women's sports in general, or at Elon in particular, what would you want it to be? And so I'm going to start with Janie.
You know what I would like to see sometime are the gyms full and the gyms loud. And I'm not sure how we accomplish that. I've really thought about that a lot. It's a matter of publicity, but it's a matter of changing the culture and the way of thinking that women's athletics is exciting. These young ladies are highly skilled. You need to come and watch them. And I know many community people who had never attended women's sports until the last couple of years who are now very involved in women's sports because they came. In fact, their word to me about basketball is the women's basketball game now is what true basketball should be, and they're playing pure basketball as opposed to what the men play. So it's a matter of getting people online with us, and it's going to take some work, but I think that's got to be one of our primary goals.
Okay. Anna?
For just Elon in particular,
Okay.
I would like to see just more athletes supporting athletes. Just, I don't know, it's more fun when everyone's there and getting rowdy, and I don't know, that's what I would like to see.
Okay. Jackie?
I would like to see better parity among the women's sports, like in an individual program, like the NCAA basketball tournament comes to my mind, and I watch both the men and the women, and unfortunately, there's the UConn and there's Tennessee, and that's it's been it for so many years. And when you look at the men's side, especially this year, I mean, no one has really survived, and just about anybody could beat anybody on a given day. And the games are really exciting, and we have that big, point spread in the women's side, and I just hate to see that because it makes the games a little less exciting. So I hope that as we provide more and more opportunities for our young women, that they will improve in their skills, and there'll be enough women to go around for all of these colleges to fund these teams, to field these teams strong enough that we'll someday be able to have that same kind of excitement and experience throughout, not just basketball, but all the other sports.
Thank you. Thank you. Faith?
I think for me personally, very similar to what Janie said, just sort of a culture where women's sport is appreciated more and considered to be as exciting as men's sports, and people come and watch. And also, I will say this, nothing annoys me more than when I turn on ESPN at 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got these guys chucking kegs over some, big bar behind them in these strongman competitions, but they can't put more women's sports on television.
Right.
I just think to myself, I'm watching somebody chuck kegs. Seriously, would you rather have a women's basketball game on? And I'd like to see that culture change. And that's going to be a hard thing to have happen. I think that sports media, I don't know that there's a ton of motivation there. But it's something I'd like to see.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
Do you think that potential for change and more people paying attention to women's sports, would it come with an individual women's sport or with a team women's sport?
Yeah, that's hard to say. I guess I would think it would be a team simply because it seems like, in general, whether it's male or female, it's team sports that seem to get, you see track and field on television, but you see it once or twice a year around the time when they're selecting the national team or something like that. Tennis, has done well in terms of, has done better, I guess, than some others in terms of professional tennis. Right. But still, I wouldn't say that's where that needs to be. So, I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because I remember reading some story that said 7 of the 10 top paid women athletes in the world, endorsements as well as the prize money, were tennis players. Like, if you're a woman and you want to play a sport that's going to make money.
And a bunch of the rest of them are snowboarders.
Wow. I thought it was going to be golf or something like that.
But those are professional sports, and not all women have the opportunity to go to that professional level either to make that money.
Absolutely. Priscilla?
I would echo what Dr. Brown said as far as the support. I'd like to see more support from alumni. The interaction that I have with the volleyball team is amazing. I love coming back, hanging out with the girls, and hopefully they enjoy me coming back and cheering them on. But I have a pride in that, in knowing that that's where I came from, and I have a duty to come back and make sure that they thrive in what they're doing. And if they have anything that they need, that I'm always there, and they know that I'm there, and they can come back and reach out to me for anything that they need. So I'd like to see a lot more alumni participation in the current day sports, and knowing that, there are athletes here now that still need you and need your support and need your guidance in what they're doing.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Sloane?
I would say the same thing about the publicity and TV, whether it's college sports or professional, just more awareness kind of what's going on in the women's, whether it's college sports, professional, just kind of putting it more out there.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, all of the panelists here, for this wonderful presentation.